Hello, I'm Tom Hall, I'm a Public Health Registrar. I'm going to talk to you today about my placement within the Screening and Specialised Services branch of the Department of Health. I joined the Department of Health in April 2011 after the publication of the NHS White Paper and the Public Health White Paper. So joining the department gave me a real opportunity to see through those major policy transitions, both for screening and specialised services. I think the placement in the Department of Health was a really interesting one because there are such parallels between the Department of Health and how we might end up working within local authorities as well, with local authority members being the ultimate decision makers and the officers providing with the tools to make those decisions and the evidence to make those decisions. As part of the proposed Health and Social Care Bill, there was a clause within that bill that allowed the Secretary of State to define which services the newly developed National Commissioning Board should be able to commission on behalf of a population, and what services should go to be commissioned by clinical commissioning groups. Now, as part of that process, the Secretary of State has to receive advice, clinical advice on which direction services should go, whether they should remain specialised services, i.e. for a small population, expensive, hard to manage, and whether they should remain with the National Commissioning Board, or whether those services could actually go and be commissioned by GP Commissioning Consortia or the Clinical Commissioning Consortia. So as part of that process, he needed to receive that advice. And our role within the Department of Health was to help provide that advice for him. And the way we did that was we got a clinical advisory group together, which consisted of key clinicians from around the country that either provide specialised services or are currently involved in GP commissioning. And their role was to look through the evidence around those services and provide a clear and transparent decision to the Secretary of State on what's appropriate to be nationally commissioned or locally commissioned. So an example would be specialised services for cleft lip and palate. Very small numbers, very tricky to manage. You don't want every small hospital doing cleft lip and palate services, but you need to specialise those in smaller centres. Now, would that be appropriate for a clinical commissioning consortium to commission, or should it remain part of the broader national commissioning structure? And our process within that was to provide advice to that group. So we had to look into the epidemiology of cleft lip and palate, the costs of those services, how easy they were to set up those services to manage a larger scale area. We had to provide all that advice, and the final decision was out of our hand, but our role within that is to provide that advice, provide that leadership, and ultimately help clinicians make that decision and them to provide the advice directly to the Secretary of State. When I was at the Department of Health, our key role was essentially around supporting decision making. Ultimately, when you're at the department, the decision making is made by ministers, but you're there to provide the options for those decisions. That fits perfectly with the public health role. Our role in terms of assessing the evidence base and gathering information to help provide those decisions is core to our role. I think that's something that fits very clearly with the future role for public health in the local authorities as well, because we are very much going to be about supporting the decision-making process, looking at the options, making sure we're appraising those options, making sure we're getting the correct advice and using the right evidence. The role I experienced within the Department of Health was very much about supporting decision making. That's what the policy teams are there to do. They're there to support ministers to make the final decision. So essentially a lot of your time is spent generating options, appraising those options and giving the best advice possible. These are really important public health skills and extremely transferable into future public health working within local authorities, I think.